We need to expand our understanding of narcissism based on something beyond the DSM, because the psychological definition of the disorder to me is an insufficient explanation. So to many of us who are still learning about and coming to terms with the reality of narcissism, the current collection of information says or appears to communicate that if you have identified the narcs or the narc in your life, i.e. a parent, a spouse, intimate partner, boss, etc., and you learn the tactics that they use to abuse and control you, and you learn to break free from these tactics, you will then break free from narcissists and narcissism for good. But in my experience, that's not true at all. True freedom would mean being able to identify and break free from narcissism in all its forms. And this can only happen when we begin to understand the impact of narcissism on the larger environment of our collective existence and how significantly it dominates life as we know it. In my work with survivors and abuse victims, I have seen many emerge victorious and free from their abusers, only to eventually get caught up in some other type of narcissistic web and not even realize what is happening. For example, narcissistic personality disorder is a form of narcissism which has been described by the field of psychology and has a list of symptoms as laid out in the DSM and the ICD, which is the International Directory of Diseases from the WHO. Since it has stringent criteria or criterion for diagnosis, and since research shows that the percentage of people that actually have NPD is very small, it seems to point in the direction of an understanding that says that narcissism is a relatively minor or a rarer phenomenon, which is really not the case if you see how so many people who've been victims of this type of abuse are coming forward with their experiences. If you observe how frequently one would come across narcissism in a variety of ways on a day-to-day basis, and I can vouch for the experience that you will actually come across narcissism on a day-to-day basis, then simply NPD less than 3% of the population anywhere is an inadequate explanation. And this is not to say that NPD doesn't exist or that there are more people who have NPD. I don't know the answer to that. But my understanding of narcissism is that you don't have to have NPD to cause the kind of damage a narcissist can cause. If someone subscribes to the same values as someone who has NPD, one may observe a similar thought process and attitude in people who may not otherwise get diagnosed with NPD for a variety of reasons. They may miss the cutoff scores, they don't meet all the criteria, or enough of the criteria, not all the criteria. They simply won't get tested, or they've been very, very good at malingering and gotten away with clearing the test, and their NPD has gone undetected. There could be a variety of reasons, but a lot of these people wouldn't sufficiently meet the criteria and therefore get a diagnosis. So if you look at narcissism as a descriptive term, however, that would encompass a certain set of values, certain types of behaviors, and very importantly, a certain mindset. Then it is far more rampant than we would like to think. A lot of people have commented about, oh, a couple of years ago there wasn't all this hoo-ha about narcissism, and now there is, and now it seems to be everybody's a narcissist, and everybody's on YouTube or social media talking about their narcissistic ex or their narcissistic family or their narcissistic boss, and it just seems to be everywhere. Certainly the term has been overused, I have to say that, and many have misunderstood the term and been quick to erroneously call someone a narcissist. But there is another reason it seems to be everywhere, and it's because we are beginning to recognize that there is a certain narcissistic mindset and behavior that permeates societies pretty much worldwide and needs an exploration that is beyond the scope of psychology. Therefore, I have actually coined a term that is going to explain this phenomenon a little bit more broadly and validate the experiences of more people. So when you look at the comment section of videos from some very well established YouTubers who have some great material on narcissism, and you can literally see hundreds and hundreds of comments from people which appear to be genuine and heartfelt, and which are coming out and saying, I feel so validated by this video, or I feel so validated by everything that you said, because this happened to me and that happened to me. And I think that you need to acknowledge that we don't need to use this very limited definition of NPD to then gaslight all those people and say, well, all of you can't possibly have encountered narcissism, because the disorder and the statistics that go along with it are simply a mismatch in terms of the sheer quantity of what's happening in the world and what we claim NPD actually is. So my understanding of what's going on a larger scale in societies worldwide is that somewhere narcissism as a descriptive term and the patriarchy as a system of oppression, as a very oppressive system, have far more similarities or far more validity as terms that can be clubbed together, because there are a lot of parallels between the descriptive narcissism and the way the patriarchy works. So I have coined a term which is the Narchiarchy, and it describes the patriarchy as it currently exists, driven by narcissistic values and a narcissistic mindset. And it's going to be a very important term going forward, as I'm hoping to offer a more rounded explanation as to why everyone seems to behave like a narcissist or be a narcissist because of this Narchiarchy. As mentioned earlier on in this video, I have seen a lot of these people fall right back into the trap of narcissism, because there is a trap and it has a much wider net than many people realize. Even when they have the best intentions and the strongest boundaries. And to me, it's because
find the Narchiarchy as
a patriarchal system, and for us to leave a unit or a person behind who we think
narcissistic
was
values
responsible for that abuse is insufficient,
and condemnation
if we are to continue to maintain a level of recovery,
uphold or run
or to continue to thrive
to
in
the
typically
aftermath
narcissistic
of
behavior.
this kind of abuse.
And the reason I've coined this term
that
is because
unit
if you look back
or that
into
person
the history of the
and have
patriarchy
always been
and part of a larger
where
system
it came from,
and that
we will
is
see
what
that
I'm
early
going
societies
to
were actually
describe
pretty
when I
egalitarian.
refer to, there's a lot of evidence
talk
now
about
to show that
Narchiarchy.
while it is widely believed that the
more
patriarchy
detail.
always existed and was present from day one of civilized human existence, there's a lot of evidence now to show that that's not the case, and earlier cultures were based on either cooperation between the genders, or they were more egalitarian, or they were matriarchies. And if you look at a lot of shamanic cultures, if you look at certain older religions or paganism, animalism, etc., they involve worshipping a female deity and essentially looking at nature as female, predominantly as female. And it was only with the advent of farming that people started to become more territorial and had to suddenly defend land, and this is where there was suddenly was a growing shift towards the role of men, which is what we would today call the patriarchy. And the other thing that happened is you had dominator cultures that invaded more egalitarian or matriarchal cultures and actually created severely punitive laws and social structures that held women in inferior and compromised roles. The reason I've coined the term the Narchiarchy is because, to me, where does the dominator culture come from? Like, where does anything come from? And I'm a big believer in thought preceding action. Now, some of you may argue that action can also precede thought, and I'm not saying that this may not be true, that this is just a one-way process. That could happen. But what I am saying is that we can't ignore the parallels between the symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder and the type of thinking that drives a dominator mindset and a dominator culture. And the parallels are too close to each other to ignore. And I believe that while it may be true that these thoughts may perpetrate this kind of dominator, aggressive, survival of the fittest rule, at the same time it also precedes it. I believe that the thought was there first, and I think that we are making a grave mistake when we attempt to understand narcissism within the narrow confines of the DSM definition of it being simply, well, just a personality disorder belonging to a very small percentage of the population. Because in reality, we bump into it far more frequently, even in our day-to-day lives, than we would like to acknowledge. We literally are living in narcissistic systems which are upheld by many. Even people who are not NPD or are not necessarily narcissists or have narcissistic traits still enable or subconsciously pledge allegiance to these very dominant narcissistic values. And even if you were to say recover from the narcissist in your life or the narcissists in your life, to me 100% 360-degree recovery is only possible if you are able to recognize narcissism in all its forms. And more I have observed that it's not just restricted to the boss or the narcissistic husband or the narcissistic wife. It's much more than that. Going forward, all my work is going to be focused on breaking free from this system, which is very difficult because it is so intertwined with our lives on a very fundamental level. I think this is one of those problems that is very fundamental in nature, and if you really want to break free from the oppression of narcissism, then we do need to look at this in a more systemic way. Generally, when I look around, what's happening in the world, especially what's happening in the world today, a lot of the problems and the very dangerous trends and ideas that we are faced with today as a world community have very strong elements of narcissism at their core. And this cannot be ignored and should not be ignored. So I am trying to create an awareness of this on a larger scale. I am trying to look at what we can do on a larger scale to shift these, literally shift. I think we as a need to shift this paradigm, because we as a planet need that shift, and we literally need to get down to the roots of our values as a global community and look at what is important to us and weed out the narcissistic thinking and the narcissistic values that drive the current systems, including the patriarchy and other systems of oppression and injustice, which all run parallel and are connected to each other in complex ways which are beyond the scope of this video today. Going forward, I am going to be exploring this environment in a much deeper way than I have been in the past, and I take this into account whenever we're looking at healing from narcissism, healing. So the characteristics that define the Narchiarchy can be better understood if we look at the parallels between the value system of the patriarchy, the thinking that drives it, and narcissistic personality disorder as defined by the DSM. And as I had said earlier, the similarity or these parallels just cannot be ignored. So let's start with the first one. A grandiose sense of self-importance, for example, exaggerated achievements and talents, an expectation to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements. In the patriarchy, the default human is male, the default being is male, and the parallel here is a grandiose sense of self-importance. Self, in this case, referring to the male idea of an acceptable person, especially an acceptable male person, and this is a very narrow definition of a person, especially a male person, rooted in a sense of deep superiority, the idea that men are not only the superior gender but the superior species, and every non-male, non-human is therefore inferior in descending order of importance depending on what use there is for them in the given order of things. Capitalism, consumerism, mass destruction of earth resources, unbound cruelty and heartless striving. Success and power are both wonderful things to have and experience in their own right, but anyone can see that their narrow pursuit in the current global scenario is being taken to almost ridiculous and dangerously destructive levels. This blind pursuit is further fueled by the growing phenomenon of motivational gurus who sell glittering fantasies of unlimited power and success, eagerly lapped up by hungry millions. Hungry for power and success millions. Again, nothing wrong with these values and ideals per se, but success was never meant to be a one-size-fits-all cut, copy, paste formula. The result route. Number 3 is the belief in being special and unique and being understood by or should associate with other special or high status people or institutions. Classism, ageism, sexism, white privilege and male privilege are all rooted in the idea that some people are more special than others. Those who don't quite make the ranks are sometimes denied even their basic dignity. In my home country, for instance, lower caste cleaners scavenge through skewers and excreta with their bare hands, even though this was outlawed in the year 2013. Even in 2025, in some parts of the world, women don't have the basic right to an education, and affordable healthcare is non existent in many other countries. And these are not just the way things are, these are gross travesties of justice where certain people are dehumanized, degraded, and dismissed on a global scale. Number 4, requiring of excessive admiration. Patriarchal culture, with its obsession with success, youth, beauty, and power, has given rise to celebrity culture, hero worshipping, and the godlike status of celebrities. To be clear, nothing wrong in being a celebrity or being admired, but when we elevate fallible humans to pedestals and incidentally, instantly also knock them off these pedestals, we are kind of dehumanizing and indirectly disrespecting their humanity. Some members, social groups, have a deep sense of entitlement, i.e., unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with their expectations. Again, white privilege, male privilege, rich privilege, any kind of privilege, privileged thinking or behavior are based on a deeply flawed logic of entitlement. And this is very visible when you look at how entitled the patriarchy enables men to feel. Especially with the way they expect and demand free labor from women and anyone else on the lower rungs of the pecking order. Number 5, interpersonally exploitative, i.e., taking advantage of others to achieve selfish ends, benefiting the privileged few. Now, the patriarchy objectifies and exploits everyone and everything, including men, in a way that serves and sustains its own existence. People are viewed as things, valued for what they do, not who they are. The intrinsic value of people, animals, trees, all of life is invisible and inconsequential. Low empathy, unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. Cruelty and indifference abound on a global scale, ranging from a basic disregard for vulnerability and emotion as weak, rather than simply part of the human experience, to hidden cruelties in child rearing, to horrific cruelty to animals, women, people of color, you name it. The patriarchy is cruel even to men if you look at the mass scale of loneliness and isolation faced by men who are unable to express emotions, reach out, and have their humanity crushed by having to maintain stoic facades, tragically leading to a rising number of male suicide. Number 8 is often envious of others or believes that others are envious of him or her. So, misogyny is actually rooted in deep fear and envy of nature, of the feminine. I don't have a precise timeline for when the patriarchy morphed into its current draconian avatar, but I deeply sense it's when men became separated from the feminine both outside of themselves and within themselves through fear, distrust, and envy. Patriarchy in its current form is deeply misogynistic, and just like the narcissist who hates his or her victim and envies them at the same time, so too is envy akin to an emotional building block of the patriarchy. Number 9 shows arrogant, haughty behaviors and attitude. Arrogant and haughty behaviors are regularly on display globally and are often celebrated and endorsed. Women and men who confront other men with unacceptable behavior are often attacked, shamed, and labeled perpetrators themselves. When victims speak out, it leads to victim blaming and shaming, which are the norm. In 1997, psychologist Jennifer Freud coined the term DAVO to describe the behavior of sexual assault perpetrators. DAVO stands for Deny, Attack, Reverse, Victim Offender. Interestingly, DAVO is present in other ways as well. Anyone who stands up for themselves against any kind of perpetrator in the Narchiarchy, sexual or not, is DAVO'd. And this tool is also used by society at large to shut down victims of all types of abuse. Another arrogant behavior shown by both NPD individuals and narcissistic value-based society is gaslighting. Now, gaslighting is a form of manipulation, but to me it's also coming from a place of arrogance, because it makes people question their very sanity. Unfortunately, it's widespread and leads to even the most rational people dismissing evidence of any wrongdoing. On a global scale, this is denying climate change, signs of fascism, denying that animals are sentient beings, and so on and so forth. Understanding narcissism from a systemic perspective is important, because studying narcissism in isolation as a psychological disorder, which apparently only a small percentage of the population have, does not reflect the true impact that it has on our global society. What we are looking at today is a really actually a global issue. And if you scratch a little deeper, you will find that there is always a connection to narcissistic values and perhaps the disorder itself in many cases. And I would go out on a limb to say that a majority of the authority figures that run the vital institutions, whether it be finance, commerce, government, healthcare, education, and when I say vital, I mean these institutions are literally the organs of humanity in many ways. And many of these vital organs of humanity, these institutions, are run by highly narcissistic individuals. And this is not something we can ignore anymore. And because these organizations, vital organs, are run by narcissistic individuals, and they are enabled by a large number of humans globally, it creates a system that will push you right back into the oppression, even when you have, or you think you have escaped from it. And a very good way to understand what I'm saying is to watch the TV show Made on Netflix. And the show is based on a true story of an absolutely amazing woman who is my hero, who is struggling to get out of an abusive relationship. And if you watch the show, you will see how all these systems, including her very own family, because a lot of family systems are also very narcissistic in nature, end up pushing her right back into the arms of her abuser. And because of this, it becomes very difficult for her to escape this situation easily. She does eventually escape, but the show, it has really amazingly, realistically shown not only the abuse she faces when she is with this partner, this very toxic partner, but also all the post-separation abuse and the institutions other than her family, including the government and her peer group, and even well-meaning friends who end up basically helping more to push her back into that dark, oppressive situation. Thank you so much for listening, and going forth, we're going to explore the Narchiarchy in more details. I hope this video was helpful and useful in any way. I would love to hear from you in the comments how you feel about the parallels between narcissism and the patriarchy. Thank you so much. Goodbye.